Okay, I think we're going to get started. I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through the questions that we've prepared for tonight, and it's going to prove to be a very rich discussion. So first, I'd like to welcome you to our first Hot Topic webinar addressing disproportionate special education, identifying and supporting English learners with and without disabilities. This webinar is the first in our OSEP Grant PLC series. Just some housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the chat feature to submit them. We also ask that attendees make sure to mute themselves during the webinar. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and all attendees will have access to the recording afterwards. My name is Dr. Kristen Leck, and I am the Director of Graduate Programs in Special Education and English as a Second Language here at Bay Path University. I am also the OSEP Grant Project Director for Closing the Diversity Gap, Intensive Preparation for Special Education Teachers. Tonight, I'm joined by 8 experts in the field of special education and ESL who will share their insights and recommendations in response to this critical topic in education. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists and have them introduce themselves before we dive into what promises to be a very rich and informative discussion. So we will start with Jennifer Alberry.
Hi, my name is Jen Alberry. I am the Multilingual Education Director for Holyoke Public Schools. I also, prior to being in the ESL world, was a special education teacher and counselor for school in Mexico. So I've come across quite a few instances of what we're going to talk about tonight, but I'm also really excited to collaborate with everyone here who wants to do the good work to ensure our multilingual community is being supported.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, Kimberly Dion.
Hi, thank you, Kristen. My name is Kim Dion. I am currently an assistant principal at Chicopee High School. And prior to that, I was the director of student services out in Lenox, Mass, where not only did I oversee special education, but I also oversaw the English language learners. And currently in my role, I do somewhat oversee the special education department, and I was on the language acquisition team last year for our school. And I'm also an adjunct professor at Bay Path too.
Thank you, Kim. Next, Jacqueline Eisner.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Eisner. I am a Bay Path alumni, went from the graduate program, and I am currently an ELL teacher for Norton Public Schools. I work with kids in preschool up to grade 3, and I also have experience working with speech and language. I was a speech and language therapist for 6 years prior, so have a lot of experience with some of the differences in development.
Thanks, Jackie. Next up, we have Sherry Elander.
I'm Sherry. I'm retired from the Wexville Public Schools, having been a special ed and transition specialist for many years. I currently am an adjunct professor here at Bay Path, and some of the experiences I had over the years was as a young girl, I lived in a foreign country, so I had to learn a new language while I was there. So I can really relate and understand what this feels like to be a person learning a second language. I also worked at Head Start for many years, which helped really ground me and make me interested in becoming a teacher. That's about it.
Thank you, Sherry. Next up, we have Kira Bergstrom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kira. I am also a Bay Path alumni. I attended both for undergraduate and graduate programming. I am currently the K through second grade special education teacher at Springfield Prep Charter School. And at this time, I work very, very closely with other members of our special ed and English language learning team to really make sure we're supporting our students as best we can. So I'm excited to contribute to this conversation as well as hear the perspectives of others.
Thank you, Kira. Next, Jody Gray Linden.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jody Gray Linden. I'm also a Bay Path alum. I graduated from the master's program in ESL in 2023, and I'm currently a doctoral candidate in ed leadership, and my focus will be on ESL issues, but I'm looking specifically at inclusion learning settings in urban environments. So my current teaching assignment, I am one of a team of ESL teachers at the Higginson K0 to grade 2 inclusion school in Roxbury, which is an underserved neighborhood in the city of Boston. And I've recently been employed as the early childhood education ESL teacher in Southbridge, Mass. I also serve as the language acquisition team facilitator for my school. So I am also doing work with professional development and helping new teachers learn best practices for supporting Ls in the classroom, especially their Ls that also have IEP needs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. Next, Blanca Torres.
Hello, I'm Blanca Lurizaca Torres. I am also a Bay Path alum. I graduated this past May with my master's in English as a second language. Um, I am also a doctoral candidate through Bay Path. Just like Jody, my focus is leadership. Let's see. I I teach here in Worcester. I'm the second grade ESL teacher. Before this, I was the fourth grade teacher, same school. I myself was misidentified as a child. I'm an English language learner, and I was continuously placed in special ed services. So I kind of know how the kids feel.
Thank you, Blanca. And our final panelist is Brenda Touchette. I hope I said that right, Brenda.
You did.
Okay.
I am Brenda Touchette. I work at a private school in Worcester. Uh, I'm a teacher, but I also am the assistant educational um, coordinator. Uh, and so I play both roles right now because we're short staffed. But we work with kids from 6 to 22, and I've worked in all of the classrooms. The classroom I'm in right now is 15 to 20, and I my first language also was not English. It was French, and I also was on an IEP all through high school, middle school, and high school. So I have some experience as well. So
Thank you, Brenda. All right, so those are our panelists for tonight. So the over-identification of English learners receiving special education services is a pressing issue in our public schools. Research shows that factors such as test bias, poor instruction, and insufficient professional development for educators working with diverse student populations drives this disproportionality. In addition, educators may lack the skills needed to differentiate if a student is learning English as a second language, displaying characteristics of a disability, or both, and then how to determine appropriate services. During this webinar, our panelists will explore the root causes from instructional gaps to the lack of targeted professional development for educators. We will dive into the complex challenge of distinguishing between language acquisition and learning disabilities and offer strategies for providing the right support. So let's get started. Our first question is for Jody and Jackie. What factors contribute to the disproportionate representation of English learners in special education programs? And what steps can school districts take to address this?
Over-identification of English language learners in special education can be driven by a range of factors, often reflecting challenges in distinguishing between language acquisition needs and actual learning disabilities. So Jody and I broke it into a few different components. First is the inadequate assessment tools and practices that we have in place. Many standardized assessments used to identify learning disabilities are not designed for ELLs, leading to misinterpretation of language-related struggles as cognitive or learning impairments. When assessments don't account for ELL's cultural and linguistic backgrounds, it increases the risk of misdiagnosis. Additionally, limited English proficiency is sometimes misinterpreted as a cognitive deficit, which can lead to referrals to special education services. Another factor is insufficient training for educators. Without specialized training, educators may misinterpret the normal process of language acquisition, such as anticipated delays, code switching, or grammatical errors as signs of a learning disability. And many teachers are unaware of the fact that it may take up to 7 years for ELLs to bridge the gap with their native English speaking peers. Additionally, teachers may consciously or unconsciously attribute academic challenges to deficits rather than seeing them as normal aspects of language learning, especially if they hold preconceived notions about certain student demographics. Some other things to consider is the inconsistent interpretation of behavioral cues that sometimes may be misconstrued from educators. Behaviors stemming from cultural differences or language barriers can sometimes be mistaken for behavioral or emotional disabilities. Jody?
We don't want to understate the systemic and institutional pressures that are being faced by schools, because schools may feel compelled to classify ELs into special education as a way to justify lower test scores or to provide students with accommodations that might improve their performance. And at the moment, especially, there's also insufficient staffing and resources for ELL programs that may lead schools to intentionally place students in special education as a way to access additional resources and supports. Some of the challenges in differentiating between language acquisition and language disabilities are systemic. So, difficulties with reading comprehension, vocabulary, and syntax are often part of the normal language acquisition process, but can be misinterpreted as signs of disability, leading to that misidentification. As Jackie said, there is this 5 to 7 year time frame that it typically takes ELs to achieve academic language proficiency, and lack of patience often leads to the premature referral into special education. We do also face barriers in communicating to parents. Language barriers such as parents not having access to fully informed consent in their home language about the implications of special education, which may lead to them consenting to special ed placements without fully understanding the impact on their child's education. There's also limited opportunities for families who are unfamiliar with the US education system to become educated on the differences between their child's new educational home and where the parent may have experienced their own education. So there's often a lot of misunderstanding about what our specific processes are and what the long-term implications are for their child. So addressing these issues requires comprehensive professional development and culturally responsive assessment practices and effective family engagement strategies to reduce misidentification and ensure that ELs receive support best suited to their needs.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Jackie. Our next question is for Brenda and Blanca. What are some common misidentifications in special education for English learners, and what strategies can educational teams take to prevent this? Brenda and Blanca.
Sorry, I was trying to get my mute button. It just wouldn't unmute.
No worries.
So I kind of took the first part of that question, so causes for misidentification. And, students are misidentified for a number of reasons. So the first one is behavior. The behavior can be misconstrued as behaviors that are seen in students with disabilities. Academic performance for, in school and difficulty mastering, like reading, writing, and speaking. Like Jody and Jackie said before, it takes 5 to 7 years to develop that academic language. Attention, so difficulty staying focused, language skills, memory difficulty, so difficulty remembering what they got, poor assessment. Students are given assessments that are um, above their level, and so teachers kind of interpret that as a student needing disability when in fact it's just the student doesn't understand what they're doing. Um, there's a lack of practice, so elves who don't practice basic communication skills at home may struggle to communicate with others. Self-consciousness, elves may be self-conscious about speaking in English, which can be misinterpreted as speech delay. And that also kind of goes into my last one, which is the silent period. Newcomer students come in and they have a period where they would rather just listen and observe before they start speaking and practicing.
So some strategies to prevent some misidentifications are some early and ongoing language assessments. So assess both language proficiencies and academic skills regularly. So using language assessments that are appropriate to the student's age, proficiency levels, and educational background that can ensure that the student has access to accommodations during assessments to reflect their true abilities. Using the use of bilingual or culturally competent specialists, so involving bilingual educators, interpreters, or culturally competent professionals in the evaluation process. Um, by doing this, these specialists can help provide a clearer picture of a student's ability in their native language and can ensure that cultural factors are considered in the assessment. Parent involvement and collaboration by engaging with parents and families early in the process to gather information about the child's history, language use at home, and any concerns about learning or development. Parents can offer valuable insights into whether the child's difficulties are linked to language acquisition or other factors. Professional development and training is really important. So ongoing training for educators on second language acquisition, cultural competence, and disability awareness is important. Teachers should be well equipped to distinguish between developmental language challenges and learning disabilities. Language specific IEP goals and services. So when special education services are warranted, developed IEPs that take into account both the student's language needs and learning disabilities to ensure that language development goals are integrated into the IEP along with academic and behavioral goals if the student needs those. And then, of course, collaboration across disciplines. So ensuring that the educational team, all those that are involved, it could be the ESL teachers, special educators, school psychologists, whoever needs to be involved, collaborates effectively when evaluating English learners so that they can approach and help prevent misidentifications by considering all possible contributing factors to a student's difficulties.
Thank you, Brenda. Thanks, Blanca. Great recommendations. Moving on to our next question. This one's for Jennifer and Kira. How can educators, it's a two-parter. How can educators accurately distinguish between language acquisition challenges and disabilities in our English learners? And then what assessment tools or processes most effectively evaluate English learners for special education without cultural or linguistic bias?
So, when considering how to distinguish between language acquisition challenges and special needs in a student, it's really important to pause and ask yourself a variety of questions about the school, about the programming that you're leading, as well as the student and their background. most importantly, it's really important that we focus in on really, let me reword it. According to DESI, it's important that if an EL is suspected of having one or more disabilities, they need to be evaluated promptly. And that's to determine if they need any additional services specifically related to a disability. And what I was going for originally is that evaluations may not be delayed due to a student's limited English proficiency. So, with that, English language is not the primary reason that we are considering a student may have a disability. Their interaction with the curriculum may be less, they may have less access to the curriculum because of their language development, but there are other factors to consider, such as is the student receiving high quality instruction that really enables them to make progress? Is there differentiation happening in the classroom? Is there multiple tiers of support going on? How does the student's growth in ELA, so specifically thinking about our listening, speaking, reading, writing domains, how does that compare to the expected growth for a student of their age and language proficiency? Are any behaviors that may otherwise indicate a disability considered typical for that child's background or adjusting to life in the United States if they're a newcomer? So, kind of jumping off of where Blanca told us about behavior kind of impacting how we perceive a student. And how are external factors impacting the student's progress? So, that could be anything from individual health to family dynamics to education history. Is the child coming to us with any sort of deep-seated trauma that we may not be aware of? And how long has the student been in the United States? Another area to really consider is that student struggling in all areas of their academic day, or is it just one and maybe a little bit of targeted instruction might be all they need to really push them forward to be successful? Other items to review when determining if a referral should even be made for a student when we have this concern is really bringing in things like the student's file. So are really analyzing report cards and their attendance, behavioral history, their home language and English language proficiency, talking about interventions that have already been attempted, assessments, whether they're academic, health, or areas related to the suspected disability, looking at the school's instructional strategies and the current practices within the classroom can be really enlightening, as well as honing in on multiple observations in various settings. Because we never know how a student is going to interact with a certain teacher in the classroom versus another teacher in a small group setting. So, using those opportunities to collaborate and compare what we're seeing is something that we'll get into a little bit later. But also, going off of an earlier statement, family interviews are incredibly important. So, looking to the people who know the student best and really capitalizing on that information that they can provide. And above all else, if you are like myself and you only speak English, or maybe the native language of this student is a language that you just have no experience with, having a translator to really be in that process and provide as close to possible translation is key, because you really want to make sure that the communication is clear and that you're really getting everything you need to know before even putting in a referral for the student to consider the fact that they might have special needs.
I'll just gently echo everything that was just said, but also I appreciate it very much because we've talked a lot about families. We've talked a lot about approaching multilingual learners as coming with wealths of knowledge, and also seeing students for their whole selves and not just one section of what they can do in English or what they've had exposure to because of their life experiences. So I just wanted to like kind of find ourselves in the diversity and celebrate that diversity within the multilingual community, because we can talk about students who have had life circumstances that have not allowed them necessarily to have continuous educational experience. Or we could talk about students who are 5 grade levels above in their first language because they've had access to this. So it's very important also, like as we enter this conversation, to not just as we do in the special education world, we do not hold like an umbrella over, but we are multiple and very diverse cohort of students and families that are entering this conversation. And I wanted to just bring up two or build off of two things that were just said, that pre-IEP awareness, the conversations that we can have with our teams, making sure that it's not one person that's looking at data or one person that's encouraging, but having a team approach, because relationships matter. Safe learning environments matter. Small group in an individualized education matters prior to an IEP, not just mandated by it. And then I love that we mentioned MTSS already. I think it's one of the most challenging school systems to do well. And it doesn't feed off of academics only. It's about well-being. It's about safe learning. And I think that we need to also make sure that we're checking how our students are interacting within all areas of their day, not necessarily just in a math class, to see how they're progressing. It's challenging, and it's also what's right. So we can do everything in our will and keep trying each day to make that the most equitable system for students. And I wanted to talk really briefly just about the assessment approaches, because I saw the question in the chat, and I, just like you, I'm looking everywhere. But bilingual assessments are helpful, and they're not always suitable for all multilingual learners, right? It really matters to know the family, to know the linguistic histories, academic histories, family histories. That's literacy, that's skills, and that's language, right? And seeing those 3 pillars of a student in different through different questions, through different communications. But we have to look for nonverbal assessments as needed to ensure fairness and validity. The only one that I have found, just to name drop and not to promote, would be the Woodcock Munoz, which is a nonverbal assessment that is normed with languages from around the world of how they transfer to English. It is normed on how they do fair comparison to alike peers with linguistic backgrounds, with academic histories, with experiences. I can't promote it as being the best, but I can say that I am so grateful for norming with alike peers, because that is what's key in interpreting data. So I wanted to just mention that, and if anybody has more information to share on the nonverbal assessments, I think that that's definitely where we should share.
Excellent points, Kira and Jennifer. Thank you so much. The next question is for Jennifer again and Kim. How can educators and school administrators ensure placement decisions are based on appropriate data rather than implicit biases or systematic factors?
Okay. So I guess I'll start. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said, so I will piggyback off some of this. We need to make sure that all our data is transparent for all of our staff. I think it's really important that all of the educators, the teachers, our counselors, and other administrators are aware of the data that's being used, so that there is no exclusion of any relevant information that you know we don't see, or that somebody has and is not sharing it at the moment. Another important thing, I think, is training, professional development on implicit biases, right? Many of us, although we don't feel like we have any biases, there are some that we do have, and I think implicit bias training is very important in the school district. And along with that is UDL training, universal design for learning. I can't stress enough, as a special education teacher, administrator, how much I try to emphasize that with all teachers and all staff, and that plays a huge part in all students. The other thing that I would say is making sure that there's equitable resources for all students, and taking a look at are students being placed in honors classes? All students are, is it equitable? Are there equitable resources for students outside of the school day? So that's really important in that. And then I think what everybody's talked about is just this holistic approach to our students. Um, what are their talents? What areas of weaknesses? Taking a look at the whole student rather just as our EL student or a student sitting in front of us in our classrooms. And just really another thing that we do here is we often reach out to some experts if we have some concerns. We look at our referral rates, and we look at placements and look at all that data to see if there are areas that we might be identifying more students in, not just in the EL population, but in our special ed population. So we reach out to our experts to help us with those identifications, and then just really clear communication with all of our stakeholders.
It's definitely the collaborative piece that Kim just explained really well, and the well-being piece that was feeding from the MTSS, and also just access, right? I want to say administratively, I've been a paraeducator, I've been a teacher, I've been a coach, and I've been an administrator. And the one thing that I have to push myself frequently on, and I find to be one of the most important pieces to support students, is getting the feedback as an administrator from the folks who are doing the assessment. How is it working for students? How are the students responding? How are the students feeling supported through this process? Is there something that we need to shift? So it's clear, open communication, and it's being willing to change what needs to be changed for the well-being of students and for the validity of data, because we can't just continue doing something because that's how it's been normed to do. So being open and being super available for the feedback as an administrator, making sure you're committing the time is one of the most important things, because I know that as teachers, that's what we do for our students, and that needs to be at the top to breathe to breathe that waterfall of support, right?
Wonderful. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Kim. Great suggestions. Keep them coming. Our next question is for Kira and Sherry. What role does collaboration between general education teachers, ESL specialists, and special education teams play in correctly identifying students' needs and providing services? How can schools and school administrators help to support this collaboration?
I will tackle the first part of this question. Collaboration is key, honestly. Collaboration is key to truly understanding a scholar's learning challenges, language barriers, and their potential disabilities. Collaboration allows for a variety of perspectives to be considered and for academics and behavior to be discussed across settings, as mentioned earlier. Some students present completely different in the whole group classroom versus a small group setting. And so having moments to connect and discuss those challenges and those inconsistencies or consistencies, if we are seeing those same things, is very important. Um, Collaboration really gives us a chance to rely on others' expertise. What I know as a special education teacher may not be what my ESL coordinator or specialist knows by heart. And it's not what the general education teacher either knows from their education training, or it may not mimic what they're seeing in the classroom. And not only does that give us a chance to talk about how we can work together to support these kids, it also challenges things that we may see or have heard in the past that now we can put into real time and kind of problem solve how to best support these students, regardless of if there is a disability present. Um, a big thing that came up in conversations about this in the past, as well as my own research, is the importance of collaboration between a special ed teacher and the ESL teacher when considering IEP goals for students with disabilities who are English learners. especially surrounding any sort of English or language-based goal. It would be a best practice to have a goal for a student in their home language as well as in English. And having moments to connect with that ESL specialist really helps refine what that should look like and set realistic expectations for our scholars. Um, Meeting regularly as a team gives more opportunities to discuss those supports for students who are struggling in the classroom and for those who are below grade level. It's time to talk about differentiated instruction, scaffolds, or ways to modify lessons to increase accessibility to all students, and to provide immediate suggestions for students who are struggling to either engage in content or make any progress in the classroom. Each student really needs to be discussed on a case-by-case basis because we've talked about it several times now. When you're looking at the whole child, all of these children are incredibly unique. Their needs are unique, as well as their academic strengths and challenges. So really appreciating that and focusing on that is so important during this collaboration process. Just to speak a little bit about my personal experience at my charter school, we have weekly collaboration meetings between myself as a special ed liaison and the general education teachers for each grade level that I'm responsible for. And then once a month, our ESL coordinator comes in and she provides information about her students in small group, any updates on access testing, any updates on our FEL students that we have. And it really provides a great opportunity to do all the things that I just mentioned. And it really helps us kind of pinpoint if there are any specific behavioral or academic challenges or trends that we can address across an entire group, or if there are really just pinpoint things that we need to focus on more than others.
Okay, thank you, Kira. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about how can school administrators help support this collaboration. Research suggests various ways state and district leaders can create consistent processes and policies to assist multidisciplinary teams in accurately identifying ELL students with disabilities. We all probably agree that the priority of a school administrator is to support the collaboration, to utilize the expertise of different members of the interdisciplinary team so that we can create an inclusive and supportive school environment for duly identified ELL students with disabilities, with all students. By initiating culturally responsive learning strategies, establishing goals, and adjusting classroom materials to meet the needs of individual students, special education and ESL teachers can assist administrators in reaching their goal of supporting all students to succeed. Developing solid relationships with all of the faculty and staff in a building is important. And really building a solid relationships with special education and ESL instructors based on trust and respect leads to more effective communication and collaboration. Also, administrators can assist and empower their teachers when those in leadership positions realize that special education and ES teachers require encouragement, support, resources, and shared planning time, and the understanding that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't always work. Administrators must prioritize systemic changes to decrease the perpetuation of the performance gaps cycle and educational inequality. Additional examples of recommendations of how administrators can assist collaborative efforts include support and participate in developing clear policy guidelines for pre-referral, referral, and assessment, funding, PD, which was already been mentioned as well, and implementing pre-referral strategies, supporting the implementation of pre-referral strategies through tiered systems of support in a timely manner. That's really important, a timely manner, as was discussed earlier. As educators collaborate more and look more deeply into students' experiences and needs, there's a better chance that students will get the support they need to succeed. Building a more culturally and linguistically responsive RTI MTSS process will help address the needs of ELLs with significant challenges more promptly and provide a framework for making more informed decisions about ELLs who may also have special education needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Kira. Our next set of questions is now moving into more policy and advocacy and future directions to address this critical need in education. So our next question is going to go to Jennifer and Sherry. How do federal and state policies like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Every Student Succeeds Act impact the identification and support of ELs with disabilities?
Totally. So there's a lot of crossover between the two laws, and there's a lot of support. And I think the collaboration between special education and ESL service providers, what we've talked about, how important that is, both of these acts support and advocate or actually manage this collaboration, and ensuring that ELs receive comprehensive and cohesive support through special education is also something that both ESSA and IDEA support. When you look at them separately, the school requirement for evaluation, the assessments being non-discriminatory and free from racial or cultural bias, and mandating that students' language preferences are taken into consideration within the assessment is coming from IDEA. And ESSA requires those annual assessments of ELs and their English language proficiency to monitor and determine the support needs. And another piece that we've spoken a lot about is to ensure that the IEPs, if students are moving forward in the referral process, have goals that support both skills and language or academic language achievement.
Okay, my turn. All righty. So from Massachusetts students receiving special education services, secondary transition is a time that begins when they turn 14 or earlier if the IEP team agrees. From age 14 until they graduate or turn 22, students on IEPs receive transition services from their public school district. When an EL has a disability, the Individuals with Disability Education Act requires the IEP team to consider the student's language needs as they relate to the IEP. IDA defines, and I'm abbreviated version, services as a coordinated set of activities designed to be within a results-oriented process to facilitate the student's movement from school to post-school activities. These services help young adults to live, work, participate in the community, and go on to further education or training as independently as possible when they leave high school or the post-secondary program. With the revision of the new IEP, districts and schools are explicitly encouraged to develop procedures and practices for communication and collaboration between special education and ESL education staff regarding support and services for ELs with disabilities, and to address the students' language access, disability-related needs, and monitor progress. Educators face the challenge of making intricate decisions about children's educational path with limited evidence and expertise spanning all of the fields that are involved in supporting a student. This can lead to well-intentioned yet inappropriate choices that sometimes result from incomplete knowledge. A helpful strategy for ESL and special education teachers is to create a dual eligible collaboration tool to document their discussion and learn about the intersection of the goals that they're both there's some intersection with ELL and with special ed to create resulting in identifying areas in which they can work together. So the more we know about what each of us are doing, you guys have talked about assessments, things like that. They're on both sides of the coin. The conversations of working together to collect information to connect goals across EL and special ed services that contribute to ongoing formal and informal culturally responsive transition assessments that will lead to improved support of a student's academic and post-school success. It offers a clear roadmap for educators to collaborate more organically from there. The key to ensuring tailored IEP service for ELL students lies in aligning processes and fostering interdisciplinary collaboration. special education, general ed, ESL, and bilingual education adhere to separate state and federal regulations. Best practices may overlook the nuances and the intersectionality in our students' backgrounds and abilities. When we also have to deal with resource scarcity, the situation becomes even more dire. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Jennifer. Our next question in this category goes to Jackie and Blanca. Looking forward, what innovations or systematic changes are needed to better support English learners, both with and without disabilities in our education system?
So I think we've all done a really good job at mentioning different ideas as to ways that we could improve our system. And there's definitely a lot of different variables we need to look at. But I think starting primarily with the learning environment, that's a really important component that I know we touched upon a lot about how important it is to make sure that these students have access to a good learning environment that's comfortable and inclusive. Um, we need to put emphasis on creating that kind of a school climate that's not only informed with teachers that understand the diversity and the different linguistic needs of these students, but also, having professional development that's accessible to staff and teachers, equal access and comfortable access to translation and interpretation services. And I think more importantly, having the ability for these parents, these caregivers to feel comfortable enough to access some of these services as well. And making sure that we have representation of all cultures and ethnicities within the school. It's amazing how important representation is, even just in libraries and throughout visuals in the school. There are different ways that you can incorporate linguistic and cultural aspects within your teaching, within all aspects of teaching. And it's again goes back to I think what everybody keeps fostering in on is the importance between collaboration with these families and within the community. Multicultural families really need to feel welcome and they need to feel prioritized in the same way that English speaking families are. Um, and some suggestions that I know we've been trialing within my school district, which have been really successful, is hosting gatherings. I know that transportation can sometimes be a challenge. We were able to get funding available to provide busing for our first one. I'm not sure about going forward, but and having community feel events where they can come to the school, feel welcome. Even some of them had never even been in the school before, and their child had been in the school for 3 and 4 years. And getting to meet other families that are in similar positions and also allowing them access to resources within the community. So I had parents that came up to me and really want to learn English, and didn't know where to begin. Not all of them have computers and access, so just even gathering resources to make them feel comfortable. um, it's really important. And we're also working on creating a parent committee within our school district. And I know a lot of districts are adapting it. I know Desi is pushing for it, which it's really great. At first, I was kind of hesitant about reaching out and asking them like, hey, do you want to just come hang out with us at the school? But I was really pleasantly surprised at how much they did want to do that. Can feel really isolating when you don't have tons of peers that speak the same language as you, and you're sending your kids all day to school. Some of these, some of the women I spoke with, some of the moms, like they're at home. They used to be with their kids and their husbands have to work all day to be able to feed them, and they're alone and they feel isolated. So creating a community is definitely very, very important. Blanca, sorry.
So I kind of looked into 4 instructional methods. The first one is creating an environment where students have high quality education in order to meet high expectations, um, using using strategies that have been shown to work. So examples are SEI strategies, drawing on prior knowledge, using like a what is it? What will I learn chart, using relevant instruction, or using relevant in student interest, whether it's culture, whether it's something that your class is interested in. Academically rich programs combine essential skill development with higher order thinking, while also providing opportunities for students to develop advanced skills in comprehension, reasoning, and composition. Early intervention programs are provided early on. These programs are meant to help students reach a level where they can profit. They create, sorry, they generate, my brain. They create a general education support system for struggling learners and reduce inappropriate special education referrals. And the last one I kind of looked into was peer or expert consultations, which is when you have 4 to 6 teachers collaborating with the one teacher who is having difficulties in her classroom, his or her classroom. Um, and during these team meetings, they're identifying the problems in their classroom and trying to figure out strategies that they can use to help their students. And these teams meet um, regularly in order to make sure that the strategies that they're using are working, and also to progress or to monitor progress with their students.
Thank you, Blanca. Thank you, Jackie. So I failed as a moderator because I skipped one question and a very important question. So I'm going back to that question right now before we have to end. But this question is for Jody and Sherry. What evidence-based instructional strategies and practices should be used when working with English learners with disabilities?
So it works out perfectly that we skipped this question and we're saving it for last, because now you're going to get a checklist of look fors, things that we've been talking about in terms of strategies that can be applied in the classroom where they don't cost you money, because you can look in your own classroom, or you can look in different grade level team spaces within your building, and you can assess whether you have these things in place. So first of all, are you providing a language rich environment in your classrooms, in your school? Do you have things labeled? Do you have word walls or sound walls? Are you incorporating meaningful texts that the students can connect to? Are you encouraging language production through structured speaking and writing activities? Are you using techniques like total physical response so students can respond to language with actions, so that you're illustrating with gestures or with visuals how to connect with a text, giving the students some way to activate their prior knowledge? Do you have differentiated instruction and scaffolding in place? Are you tailoring instruction to individual student strengths, needs, and preferred learning modalities? Are you using flexible groupings? Are you using varied materials? Are you adjusting tasks to make content accessible? And are you providing scaffolding like graphic organizers, sentence frames, visual supports, sensory tools that some children might need to access? And are you gradually reducing support as students become more proficient so that you can build their autonomy and their confidence using English in the classroom? Do you have explicit language and content objectives in your planning? Now, I teach at the early childhood level, so I can guarantee you that 0% of the children that I'm teaching in the ABA Strand classroom can read or state back what my language and content objectives are when I'm working with them. But it's just as much for me and for the other professionals that are working with the students in my classroom. Those objectives lead us, they remind us of what the objective is for the lesson, both in terms of content learning and in terms of language support and language acquisition. And it's really important that teachers who have multilingual learners in their classroom are articulating both through the planning process. I highly recommend going over language objectives, looking at whole units, and then looking at your unit assessments to be sure that your team is really meeting the needs of your multilingual learners in terms of accessing the language that's on those assessments and is key to acquire the knowledge in your content areas. Have you as a teacher modified instructional pacing, and are you allowing for wait time? Because this is a really foundational part of being a language teacher. You have to slow down the pace of instruction, and you have to allow your English language learners with and without disabilities additional time to process the communication and formulate a response. So extend your wait time after asking questions, allow students to prepare their responses, because this can actually enhance language comprehension and participation for all of the students that are in your classroom. And it also prevents you from always calling on the same students over and over again. So it allows a more diverse group of students to participate. Repetition and reinforcement of content are really key. Key concepts, vocabulary, and skills, they needed to be repeated frequently. And using a spiraling technique to revisit concepts and skills over time can benefit ELs with and without disabilities who need more exposure to retain the information. Teaching vocabulary in an explicit way. I'm not going to get into the intricacies of teaching reading and the importance of acquiring phonemic awareness and building that into early literacy practices. That is for another day. But really explicitly teaching vocabulary is specific to our ESL domain. Visual supports and multisensory tools benefit all students. Do you have them? Is there evidence of them in your classroom? And then, as has been stated, collaborative learning and peer support, being able to access a peer mentor, no matter the age of the students, can be really beneficial to ESL students, to students with disabilities. It creates a community within your classroom. It helps lower the affective filter so that all students feel more comfortable participating in your classroom community. And by implementing structured cooperative learning opportunities and activities where roles are clearly defined and tasks are broken down into manageable parts, which you have explicitly taught, you're scaffolding instruction and community interactions for all learners, which is really important, regardless of whether or not the student is learning English or has a disability of any kind. I'm going to just mention this. Use of technology and assistive devices can help, but it's never going to be the primary go-to. So using translation devices is not best practice in most schools, but it can be assistive technology that helps you to communicate with a new arrival. But if you have a student with a disability that's using text to speech or visual or auditory aids, you should be using those to support their language acquisition, as well as to support the style of learning that their disability may require. And then for students with physical or sensory disabilities, some assistive technology can help, but what we don't want to do, what schools have unfortunately trended towards since the COVID lockdown, is overusing screens and using them as a replacement for authentic language learning in a community of other language speakers. And our students with sensory needs often don't do well spending too much time on a Chromebook or on an iPad. So we want to make sure that we're really providing them with a multimodal form of instruction.
Thank you, Jody. In recognition that ELL students are coming to us with tools and knowledge, a funds of knowledge approach to understanding students' abilities and experiences can help teachers draw on these classroom skills to enrich their understanding of academic content while motivating them during classroom activities and participation in the assessment collection for IEP development and transition planning. Funds of knowledge can be described as educational and personal background knowledge, accumulated life experiences, skills, and knowledge used to navigate everyday social context, and worldviews structured by broader historically and politically influenced social forces. During developing curricular content around students' personal context, skills, and experiences helps to scaffold their understanding of academic material and provides information for things like current performance, development of goal, life planning, what their vision is. for their future. Integrating patterns of learning, knowing and doing familiar to culturally and economically diverse students make academic content more accessible to connect to their lives and is understood on a deeper level. Integrating a student's funds of knowledge into classroom lessons can be done across all content areas and easily be applied to standards-based instruction. A funds of knowledge inventory matrix that includes curriculum areas, home and community practices, and classroom applications can help teachers record their observations and possible classroom ideas, and assist with IEP and transition planning. Information gathered can identify what types of funds of knowledge the academic category best applies. This information can be used to brainstorm ways to integrate skills in that particular context into an educational lesson. The goal is to have information examples available to help guide lesson development when needed, also to prepare for IEP meetings. Research suggests that instruction for dually enrolled identified students should be asset-based, culturally responsive, and focused on each student's strengths and varied experiences. As successful applications of this approach grow within teacher preparation programs and professional development contexts, educators will become more aware of the accessibility of personalized learning techniques and the value of integrating their students into lesson development and implementation to provide and promote meaningful instruction. So really talking about looking at it as asset-based training.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Jody. Jody, I agree. I think that question worked out extremely well, getting moved to the ending of our webinar. So we are out of time, but I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists. You were all truly amazing, and the passion and dedication that you have for working with diverse student populations was very apparent tonight. And I'm just really impressed and really grateful that all of you could be here to participate in the webinar. And for our attendees, or for those who registered who were unable to attend tonight, a recording of tonight's webinar will be sent out by Bay Path Admissions. And if you have any questions about English as a second language, licensure programs, or special education programs, transition specialist certificates, ASD certificates, please reach out to Bay Path University, either admissions or myself, and we will get back to you right away. So have a great night, everyone, and thank you again.
Thank you.